again by thanking our sponsor, Renaissance Bank, and Chris Braun and our folks at Renaissance. They are sponsoring this entire series for the year, and very much want to thank them. And just as a reminder to everybody, this is part of a monthly series that the Chamber is hosting with different community leaders to do two things. One is to talk about kind of what's going on right now with those elected officials and the policies that they're working on, and the different areas of influence that they have, but also to get to know them a little bit. They're people that we might know from events and meetings and certainly in the news, but we want to talk to them a little bit about their leadership philosophies, how they approach their role in the community, and kind of how they think about the work that they do. We also have a number of pre-programmed polling questions that we ask that they're specific to this conversation about education and our public schools. So I'll pause the conversation. So I hope everybody will participate in that. It will make it a lot more interesting and engaging if y'all participate, give us some feedback. So that'll help us in the dialogue and the conversation. So with that, I am going to get us kicked off here by welcoming our school board chair, Kristin Morrissey. And I've worked with Kristin a long time, well before she was on the Board of Education, and she's been very involved in the Chamber as well as our school superintendent, Dr. Jeff Bearden, who also serves on the Chamber board and is very engaged in the business community and specifically around the area of career development and as it relates to students. So thank you all both very, very much for being on the call. So Dr. Bearden, if it's all right, I'll start with you, and then Kristin, I'll come back to you to just really introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school, and what brought you to Forsyth County.
Okay, great. Thanks, James. Good morning, everybody. I grew up in a military family. My dad was 20 years Air Force, so we moved around a lot when I was a kid. I have three brothers, and we lived in, Virginia, Texas, California, Italy, and Japan growing up. And then when my dad retired, my dad was originally from West Georgia, and his parents were living in Bremen at the time, which is right on the Georgia-Alabama line. So that's where my dad retired, where I went to high school. After high school, I attended West Georgia College for a couple of years. I was one of those kids that really didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. I kind of floundered a little bit that first try at college, and eventually decided when I turned 21 that I would kind of follow the family tradition and join the military as well. My two older brothers were in the Air Force at the time, so I enlisted. Was hoping to be stationed somewhere in Europe because my oldest brother, Alan, was in England at the time. But the Air Force decided I needed to be in northern Maine, right on the Canadian border, where winter lasts about 10 and a half months. It's brutal. But at the time, the Soviet Union was still in existence. And so that base, Loring Air Force Base, was a very strategic base for our country. We were really the first line of defense against the Soviet Union if they were to attack us. So that base was full of nuclear weapons and bombers and things like that. Well, through that experience, I got an opportunity to coach basketball at a local high school. And that's when the light bulb went on for me in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. I really knew from that experience that I wanted to get into education and be a teacher. And so I taught for several years. I taught 7th grade language arts, high school government, continued to coach basketball. I had a superintendent that encouraged me to move into administration. Before he did that, I never really thought about it. So I spent the first 20 years of my career in Maine. I had 2 superintendencies when I was in Maine. You can imagine very small systems. Maine is a very rural state. My first superintendency was 330 kids, one building. The central office was myself, a secretary, and a bookkeeper. And so I had to wear every hat going: transportation, special education, facilities. What a great learning experience for a young administrator. I would never trade that for anything. Man, my second superintendency in Maine was literally from northern Maine to southern Maine, right on the Maine-New Hampshire border. A little larger system, 5 schools, 2,500 kids. From there, I went to Fayette, I came home to Georgia, to Fayette County, then from there to Rome City. And this is my 7th year serving as your superintendent in Forsyth County. And no doubt the best job I've ever had, the best community I've ever worked in. And the other communities were great too, don't get me wrong. But in terms of our support for public education and the great partnerships we have with the chamber, with our business community, there's no other system I've worked in that has had that type of synergy like we have in Forsyth County. I'm really proud of that.
Great, thank you. Well, you'll be glad to know in just a few minutes. Actually, just another couple hours. Al Hodge, the longtime chamber president in Rome, is coming by. He's now retired, but he's coming by to visit with us for a little while. And,
please tell him I said hello.
I absolutely will. Will. Kristin, thank you for being on with us today. If you would just do the same, just where you grew up, where you went to school, and what led you to Forsyth County, and what led you to decide to run for school board.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, James. I was born in Rochester, New York, so I am a Reformed Yankee, as I refer to myself. I lived there for, well, I don't want to give away my age, but for several decades. I went to college at Rochester Institute of Technology and to the SUNY University System in New York. I went for microelectronic engineering and then also computer science, which is funny because side story, I met my husband. I was studying microelectronics at the time, and I met my husband, my future husband at the time, and he was studying computer science. And I thought, wow, he's kind of a nerd. And yet I was studying microelectronics, but I ended up switching my major to computer science in the end because I got a job in a library system. And at the time it was a part-time job. I was also working full-time at Kodak at one point, and then also in a restaurant as a bartender and a waitress. So I was a little bit of a workaholic while I went to college. And I got working into a system. I was, started on the ground level as in data processing and doing quality control. And I found out how much I really enjoyed computers and quality control and just figuring out how things work, how the systems worked. And it was a civil service job. It was government, and I was a contractor, but I kind of worked my way up. And most of the people in that system had been in those jobs for 10, 20, 30 years, and they were very set in their ways and how they did things. So I was kind of the young whippersnapper, if you want to think of it that way. And they were very used to doing things the same way. And a lot of it was the cataloging department at the time, technical services. And so they did a lot of jobs that were repetitious, and I got bored. So I would find ways to automate things with the computers. And so I would just say, well, if we're going to do the same thing over, let's do it this way. And so I would find ways to do things faster or different. And so eventually I kind of worked my way up throughout the system, and I ended up being an automation specialist. And then I got into the IT department, and I got into doing web design and security. And then I ended up training the staff. And what was nice is, and this is something that I've learned, I think, for when it comes to being someone who's in managing styles, is really letting your staff run with their job. Once they know what they're doing, or once you give them a job, let them run with it. They might make mistakes. I made mistakes along the way, but I was allowed to just create my own job, literally. And I loved that my boss gave me that freedom, because I learned so much, and I was able to expand the job and learn from that. And that was the best boss I ever had. So that job really made me figure out what I wanted to do in life. And one of the things I spent the most of time doing was the training of staff. So I was able to create my own curriculum and standards, which is really a thrill. So I was never actually a teacher. I was an instructor. I would train, I'd have 2 rows of computers. I'd train 12 people at one time. And I've had everything from a 16-year-old student to a 65-year-old staff person. And you're trying to teach them on a computer with Microsoft, and you've got Macs, and you've got all different levels of abilities. So I have an appreciation for what it's like to have a teacher who's got 25 or 30 people in their classroom, students of different abilities, and you're trying to teach them. And it's almost like you're a stand-up comedian, because you're trying to keep their attention for 3 hours, for me, 3 hours at a time, 5 days a week. And it's a tough job. So all that being said, we moved down to Georgia for a job opportunity, because the economy was much better in Georgia at the time. We moved to Alpharetta. Well, my husband got a job in Alpharetta. We picked Forsyth County. Obviously, the taxes were low and the schools were were great. So that was why we picked Forsyth County. At the time I was home with a newborn and a kindergartner, and the growth was, as you know, really happening a lot down here. I got involved, ended up being the HOA president, ended up being on the startup PTA with Brookwood, got involved with developers. There was a lot of angst in the community at the time with the growth. And I felt like, as a move-in, I felt like I was part of the problem, and there was a lot of discussion in the community about what to do about that. And I really felt like I wanted to be part of the solution and not just be part of the people that were complaining. So I ended up being a lot of times a mediator. I think, James, you know how that kind of came about. And I felt like I heard people saying all the time, why don't they do something about it? Or why don't they fix it? And I kept finding myself saying, well, did you call they and ask them? So I felt like it was best to step up and try to do something. So that's a long story, but I had 2 young children that had 13 years each to go in the school system, and it was a great school system. I didn't get involved because I thought things needed to be changed. I got involved because I moved here like so many, because it was a great school system. And I just wanted to be sure as we continue to grow, it stayed that way. So I felt like I had the time. I was used to working hard. And so I felt like I should do my part to see if I could help. So that was my story.
Very good. And how has the transition been to becoming they? Now that you are, what are they?
Well, that's a great question. Well, I do think it's important I have to look at things differently, to be honest. That's one of the things. We have a new board member, and one of the things that, when you have a new board member on, which is not very often, I have to remember that I'm not a parent anymore. I'm still a parent, and when I'm home, I'm that way. But when I'm on the job, I have to remember, as a board member, I bring that experience with me. And that's important. A lot of people think when you're a board member, you know everything about everything. They'll ask you a question, they assume you know everything about 6th grade curriculum and 5th grade curriculum. And a lot of the experience and things I know is just from being a parent. But the reality is I have to look at things as what's best for not only my district, but the school system as a whole. So I have to remember that I'm not a parent anymore. When I'm doing my work, I'm a board member, and I have to think about what's best, not only for the students, but for the staff and for the school. So I really have to look at the big picture often. And that's hard. You have to step back sometimes and remember, I'm not just a parent anymore. So it is a transition. It's a balance for sure.
Very good. Well, thank you. It's, well, both of you, but I know certainly from a school board perspective, can be a dirty, thankless job, and appreciate you doing it. We've been very fortunate with incredible leadership for 30 plus years in our school system, and I appreciate the work that y'all are doing, and I know everybody on this call does too. So let's turn a little bit more. I don't think anybody is claiming victory. We're done with COVID just yet, but obviously we're in a different state now than we were certainly a year ago and even 6 months ago. So and school systems across the country have just been rocked to the core. Some probably more than others, depending on where they are in the country. And can you kind of walk us through, because of course we hear a lot of this on the national media, even state media and regional media, but walk us through like Forsyth County schools and what were the, I think there's a perception of what challenges that we faced and as a school system that may be accurate, may not, but kind of walk us through what those true challenges were, and what you faced and how you managed through those.
Jeff's muted. Jeff, you're going to go? You're muted.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Somebody muted me.
Yeah,
I'll start and then turn over to Kristin. When we were planning last spring and last summer for this school year, March 13th last year was our last day of school. We had no idea at that time that was going to be the last day of school, for the entire year. But as time went on and eventually the governor shut it all down, for the school year. So we went into the summer very much unknown what we were going to be dealing with come August. Well, we surveyed our parents about their comfort level in terms of returning to face-to-face instruction. And I know Kristin will remember this. It was so telling for us as a board. Literally 25% said they were absolutely 100% ready to send their children back. And 25% said, no way. I am not comfortable at all sending my children back to school. So when we talked as a governance team, and that's what we are in Forsyth County, the board superintendent very much work as a team. When we talked as a team, we said, you know what, we got to give our parents a choice. You know, we're not going to force our parents to do one thing or another. It's going to be incumbent upon us to be prepared for whatever parents are comfortable doing. And so we said, if you want to learn virtually, then we're going to provide that opportunity for you K through 12. If you want to learn face-to-face, we're going to provide that opportunity for you K through 12. And we even allowed middle school and high school students to work in a hybrid, in where they were coming to school for some classes. You know, some of those labs that, you know, the hands-on is so critically important, science lab or whatever the case may be, or a music class, chorus, band, those types of things. So we had some kids coming to school for a couple of periods and learning from home the rest of the time. And we just had to be okay with that. We just had to say, you know what, we're just going to provide the best customer service we possibly can. We're going to give our parents a choice. Now, if you had told me when we started school August 13th, that we would have made it through the entire year without having to shut the entire district down because of COVID, I would have been shocked.
Yeah.
You know, when we started on August 13th, it was really like day by day, you know, following the data every single day and letting the data determine whether we needed to shut a class down, whether we needed to shut a wing of a school down, the entire school down, a cluster of schools, or the entire district. Fortunately, we never had to shut the entire district down. And I'm really proud of the fact that I believe we gave our students as normal of an experience as we possibly could. They still participated in athletics and in clubs and music and drama. Granted, we had fewer spectators attend because of COVID, but we tried to give our kids a normal experience. And Kristin's going to laugh when I say this, I know, but the word we used over and over and over again this entire year was we had to be prepared to pivot. Every single day, we had to look at the data and decide, okay, what does that mean for us tomorrow? And our teachers, I'm telling you, James, and our leaders, they did heroic work this year. I mean, they were prepared to pivot at a moment's notice and work so hard. The hours our teachers put in, you know, nights, weekends, to make sure our kids had access to the learning that they needed was just extraordinary. And I just could not be more proud. Kristin, you want to add anything to that?
So, yeah, the challenges starting out the year was the budget. We came into it with a went from 27 to $23 million deficit. And that was just devastating for us. We did not want to go back into the days of furlough days like we had done years before. We had 5 years of furlough days without step raises, without cost of living raises, and we just did not want to do that. And that was really a tough one for us. So we made the really tough decision to dip way into reserves, and that's what it's there for. And we were fine with doing that, but it just gets us to a point when it comes to paying bills in the fall that it cuts it scraping, right down to being able to pay the bills in the fall. So, but with some support from our state delegation, we were able to make that decision and feel comfortable with it. But it was also a big challenge to make the schedules work. I'm so proud of our leadership at our high school levels, especially in our middle school levels. They really did something that was unprecedented. Our principals have always worked together and they collaborate and they support each other. And there's always a great level of competition with them. They always want to succeed and be the best high school academically and sports. But they shared their resources and they shared their teachers in a way we have never done before. In order to make our students' schedules work, we had to share teachers across schools, which is something we've really never had to do before. because we had so many students working virtually, and that was from K to 12, actually, we would have some classes, some schools, for example, that only had 5 students, say, that wanted to work from home and be virtual. Well, that's not really enough financially to afford a teacher at that school. So we would share a teacher from another school. And at an elementary level, that's a little bit more clear cut. But when you get into a high school level and it's a social studies class or a science class, it's a lot more difficult to schedule. So we had a lot of sharing from one school to another. And that was a feat of, and doing a high school schedule normally is difficult. But when you're sharing across teachers across schools, I'm so pleased with what our administration did to make that work. And so that was, first semester was really a challenge to make that work. And that was why we ended up tweaking our schedule for the second semester to give them that extra time to make that work. So that was something, I'm so proud of them. And then I think, Jeff, wouldn't you say the added challenge of the whole year really was the additional work of having to do the contact tracing for our staff?
Yeah.
That was the amount of work and time that took our administration to do contact tracing is just nights, weekends, the number of hours they took. Do you want to expand on that, Jeff?
Yeah, because the Department of Health, required us, if a student was within 6 feet of someone with COVID for 15 minutes or longer, they had to quarantine for a certain period of time. So you have to, look at your seating charts in all your classrooms. You have to look at your bus seating charts. And we had to track that, where our kids were at all time so we could accurately quarantine those students. And I know for some of our parents, that had to be incredibly frustrating because we have students that were quarantined 3, 4, 5 times, never had COVID, but they had to quarantine because they were exposed to someone with COVID. But our parents were very cooperative. They understood, they knew we were trying our best to give our kids a normal experience, and really received very, very few complaints from parents throughout this entire year in terms of what we were trying to accomplish with our kids. They were very cooperative, very understanding, very empathetic.
And that added one more challenge to the teachers because they would have students that were in person, face to face, they'd have students that were virtual, and then they had hybrid, but then they also had the students that were quarantined who were at home. So teachers would be teaching all day long, and then they have students that were not in the classroom at all, and they were trying to support them through their homework and stuff, and then they had to come back and make up tests. So our teachers were just superheroes this year, and the parents that were home trying to help those students as well. It was, I'm glad the year is almost done for that part for sure.
Well, so and on the kind of the reverse side of that, every crisis has opportunity in it, and what are some of the more positive experiences that came out of this past year?
That's a great question, and we like to say all the time, challenges create opportunities, and they do. I would say if you polled our teachers right now, they would tell you I'm a much better virtual instructor than I ever was before. And even if I never teach virtually again in my life, I now have more tools in my toolbox than I ever did before because I was forced out of my comfort zone. I was forced to do things last spring that I never really wanted to do, never really desired to do, but we're all learning from home. I had no choice but to figure things out so that I could reach my kids. And now, I think they would tell you they're a much better teacher than they were before because, again, they have more resources at their disposal. That's one thing. And I would say the other one is, as a school system, we really are focused more now than ever before on giving families a choice. School does not have to be an 8 to 3 experience for every child. And so we're really thinking outside of the box in terms of, it used to be, being a former high school administrator, we would build our schedules based around the needs of our adults and our teaching staff. Well, that's kind of flipped now. We are now starting to build schedules based on the needs of our customers, which are our students. And doesn't that make sense? And so moving forward, and I think Kristin would agree with this, we're going to do our best to provide our families as many choices as possible so that we can meet their needs and those kids can find their niche. And I think if we do that, we have a 96% graduation rate right now. Well, how do you move the needle on that? One child at a time. And so it's incumbent upon us to try to find schedules and opportunities where every child finds their niche and they stay engaged.
And I would add also that, doing this virtual environment, I think we've all learned that we can run our meetings more efficiently, and virtual is not going to go away. And I think that's a good thing. Our parents have become more engaged. They have had to learn. We've had parents that were very involved and used to using our learning management system, but now more parents have had to, and I think they're going to stay more engaged, the ones that maybe weren't as comfortable with the system, because now they've had to. And I think that's we've had more parent involvement now. Even things like curriculum night, we had more parents involved because every school has curriculum night. And then there was the one time when you could go, and sometimes we have parents who have multiple kids and they couldn't go to 2 places at one time. So now we have that videoed and they could catch it. If they couldn't make it at that time, they could watch it after the fact. Our schools have learned from the parents that this is the way to go. We're going to do it both ways. So that's not going to go away anymore. We have schools that would have events and there wouldn't be enough parking because we have such parent involvement. Well, this is another way. It's a second option to do it. It's a backup option. So we're going to keep those ways out there. So we've learned that this is a good thing. I really am excited about things that are not going to go away after COVID, for that matter. I also think this is, as Jeff was talking about, this not the 9 to 5 for school anymore. It's also going to be a financial savings for us as we continue to grow. It's another way for us to look at overcrowding. As we have alternate schedules and we have students coming and going, it's allowing us to have the same number of kids in a school, but they're not all there at the same time. So it's a more efficient use of the space, and it's ending up being a cost savings for us as well. So that's a more efficient use of tax dollars, which is always a good thing as well.
Excellent. Very good. I mean, certainly, I think the organizations that leaned in really did, find some opportunity, and certainly it was obvious that the school system did, and that of course requires great leadership, and thank you. It's obvious we came out of it with some important lessons learned that'll set us well for the future. So speaking of the future, so that's kind of where I was going to turn our conversation next. But before we get into some of the questions, I have a polling question that I want to ask, a survey question for our guests, and it will help inform some of the next part of the conversation about the future. So Jesse, if you would post the first polling question, which I'm assuming we'll be able to see on there. There it is. Which is more important in your view? And of course, this is a big chamber conversation and discussion. Preparing students for college or preparing students for a career? So we're going to take just about 30 seconds and let folks respond to that. So please do. All right. So it looks like not in terms of sheer numbers, but by large margin, but by certainly by percentage, preparing students for a career was the winner there. So let's if you will talk about kind of the next phase for our school system. What do the next 10 years look like for Forsyth County schools, and what are the schools going to look like, and how in that time will we be able to, with continued growth, I suspect continued changes and challenges that will be in the community, and how will we maintain the excellence that we've established as a system?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me talk, if you don't mind, let me touch on that polling question for a second, because I will tell you, I believe our learner profile, which is the work of Forsyth County Schools, prepare students for both college and career. And I think if Kristin has it right there in front of her on the screen. I think if folks in our community, If they're not familiar with our learner profile, if they became familiar, and the 5 major tenets I'll share with you: pursue continuous learning is 1, exhibit strong personal qualities is 2, utilize creative and critical thinking is 3, engage and contribute is 4, interact effectively is 5. And there are sub bullets under each one of those. And I think if you look at that from a parent perspective, from a university perspective, and from a business perspective, I think we would all agree kids who graduate from Forsyth County schools, if they possess those skills, they are going to be successful in college and career, because those are the skills they need to be successful in both. So it's one of the reasons I'm really proud of our learner profile. That wasn't created by me. That wasn't created by Kristin. That was created by our governance team after taking lots of feedback from our community, stakeholders, our business partners, our parents, our students, our teachers. And we put this together and said, okay, this is the what for Forsyth County schools. These are the skills. How our students get there, well, that is determined school by school with our school leadership teams. And I think that's the hallmark of our school system, and will continue to be so into the future, is we give our schools lots of autonomy. We're really clear about our expectations. We want every student to graduate and possess those skills on our learner profile. How you get there might look differently at Lambert High School than it does at North Forsyth High School, and that's perfectly okay. Because to me, that really engages the community when they're able to work with their leadership teams on figuring out the how. In terms of the next 10 years, education is always evolving. As I said earlier, all the pivoting we did this last school year, we learned a lot from that experience. And we will look back on this last 14 or 15 months, and I don't think there's any question we'll say we're better for it. Now, do I want to go through it again? No, never again. However, we're going to be better because of it. And I think as we continue to move forward, we will continue to offer more and more choice, more and more flexibility for our students and families. And Kristin hit the nail right on the head when she talked about efficiency. I mean, with this last bond that we passed in 2018, $295 million, we built several schools. Now, moving forward, we don't see the need for another bond in the near future. Our bricks and mortar, we're in pretty good shape now, but we'll continue to grow. But with that growth, if we're really good at virtual education, and virtual is not for every kid, let me be clear about that. It is not for every child, but it does work for a number of our students and our families. And if our families feel like that virtual option has the same quality as the face-to-face, then I think that's an opportunity to have more students engaged in that, which, as Kristin says, frees up more room in our bricks and mortar schools and makes us more efficient. The only other thing I would add, and I'll turn it over to Kristin, our Alliance Academy is now in its 3rd year of existence. That was a direct result of being responsive to our community. Our community was saying, we need to offer a certain pathways for our students that we weren't offering in our traditional high schools. So again, I think it's incumbent upon Kristin and her colleagues on the board and myself as your superintendent to be really responsive to our community and our businesses, telling us, hey, and working with the Georgia Department of Labor, here are the jobs that are coming in the future. You need to be responsive and make sure we're preparing kids for those opportunities. Kristin, what would you add?
I think you did that. Our strategic plan goes through 2022, so we're not far off from redoing that. And whenever we do a strategic plan, we get an awful lot of community input on where we're at. We always kind of judge where we're at and get a lot of feedback, and then where we want to go. So that will be coming down the road. When it comes to virtual, we had a really pretty good year, but we received feedback, and so we have our asynchronous environment in our Forsyth virtual. As we go forward, we're going to continue to improve that and grow that, but we'll also, for our virtual environment, we look to make it also a synchronous environment. We're working on that as we expand, and that's something we're going to improve upon, but that will take time to do that quality. And so we're going to continue to work on that over the years. But I think we need to hear what the community says, but when it comes to the growth, we have reached that point where we've built most of the schools we need. We've got a little bit more still in the works that we're working on, but we're kind of going to work on our maintenance mode and just kind of keep the schools. We have 40 schools right now, basically. We've got a couple more opening up and facilities. So we've got a lot to take care of. And we just want to make sure what we have is kept up to par, not just from the bricks and mortar of it, but technology, safety is always very important for us with all those schools. We have a great relationship with our sheriff's department, and that's something we're really excited and proud about. Our SROs, our SASs, our safety advocate specialists are something that's very important to our school system. So that is something that we'll continue to invest in with that relationship with the sheriff's department and our counselors. So that's just something that's all part of the network that we have to keep moving forward.
Just you touched on something just a moment ago, and actually it resonated in that I'm sure most business people are having this conversation and have been having this conversation. Obviously, you all are, and that is the idea that if you put it in sort of the private business community, the idea of a remote worker and working virtually, that it's not really an either or anymore. There are probably components that you can do virtually, and there are components that you can't. Right. So, so when you look at the future, that sort of adding that virtual component in, how do you foresee? And I realize I'm probably asking questions way premature, but how do you foresee decision making about what's more appropriate, to be in person, and what's more appropriate, to at least be eligible to be virtual?
Yeah, well, first of all, any courses that are really hands-on, any type of lab, I just don't see how you can replicate that virtually. That's really hard to do. Your band, your chorus, that's really,
Lobotomy.
Almost impossible. What's that, Kristen?
Lobotomy.
Yeah, those are impossible to do virtually. And so, you need to have that hands-on experience. Kids need to have that. But there are other courses, especially when you get into high school, that there's a lot of lecture, a lot of research. Those can be done very effectively in a virtual environment. The key is to make sure that the virtual piece is engaging for our students. One of the things the board allowed me to do a couple years ago at Forsyth Virtual Academy, we have a few employees that are content creators. And so they spend a lot of time on cutting edge research on how to make courses really engaging to the virtual learner and interactive, because you don't want kids to just sit there and be reading a script or listening to a video and then responding to questions. You need to be more engaged and more interactive. And we have improved a great deal in our Forsyth virtual offerings because of those content creators teaching our virtual teachers how to engage kids further. As we move forward, I really do see, especially middle school and high school, I see more and more families looking at a hybrid opportunity, especially if they have the means to transport their child to and from. That I think will be a very popular choice moving forward. But the virtual content has to be engaging. If it's not, we're not going to get those kids. And I'll add, just as a parent, I've got 2 kids in college right now, and obviously they were forced to learn virtually for all of their classes this year. But even before then, some of their coursework was only offered virtually. And so for our students to leave Forsyth County schools with at least some experience with a virtual platform, I think really helps them post-secondary.
And even in careers, and I guess that's kind of where I was headed.
Yeah, right. Even in
careers. There's no way we're ever going to go back to, all right, everybody's in the office every day. We're, it's 8:30, because it's so inefficient, and being able to prepare students for, careers like that.
Lambert High School we're almost started a pilot program this year, and just with the nature of COVID and all, we've decided to hold off on it. But basically it was an even new version of hybrid, where the students would, on some courses, they would go to school a few days a week in person so they could actually have to take tests, in a safe environment, but they would also have some days where they would work at home virtual. They would still have to dial in and have actual live lessons with the teacher for, say, 20 minutes of an hour. So there would be actual interaction with that teacher. They would come in and they get their assignments and they might have some lecture. And then for the remainder of that, say, hour period, they would then stay at home and do their work at home. It could still be a group project or whatever. And then 2 or 3 days, they would go actually into the school. So it was actually for one course, half home, half in person. So it was really kind of a neat mixture. So we're still working towards, having that at some point down the road. I think that's another future option that again could help with overcrowding, but I think that's a nice way to prepare our students for college and work, because that is kind of a reality mix. So I think that's something we're working towards, and I think that would be kind of state of the art as well.
Very good. Very good. Well, I want to make sure that we protect enough time to get into sort of the more leadership discussion and sort of operating philosophy. But I do want to ask the folks on the call for we have another polling question, survey question. And so Jesse, if you wouldn't mind posting the second one. So as this is for those of you who are business folks and employers, an employer, what skills, and even if you're not an employer and want to answer this, what skills do you think are most important for students right out of school? The problem solving skills, soft skills, personal responsibility, workplace norms, that sort of thing, technical skills, or all of the above. So we're going to take just another couple of seconds to. So again, sort of in terms of numbers of those that voted, not a huge gap, but percentage-wise a gap. And no one voted for technical skills. Not that I think that means that everybody thinks they're not important, but just of those did not select that as their most important. So thank you all for casting that. And along those lines, kind of, school systems are asked to do so much in terms of those soft skills, which, in the learner profile that you all described well, but also, also on the technical skills and staying abreast of a business world that is changing unimaginably fast. So in kind of thinking through that lens of that, what do you all, how do you see as the biggest challenge in addressing making creating a student and investing in a student in a way that truly does make them a competitive college student, competitive in terms of the workplace, when you look at it through the context of all of that change and this enormous expectation?
Yeah, well, you actually touched on it in framing your question, because we are preparing students for jobs that have not even been created yet. The workforce is changing so dramatically. And so that's why you go back to our learner profile and you see the emphasis on problem solving and critical thinking and creative thinking. And those soft skills are intertwined throughout our learner profile. When kids leave Forsyth County schools, and they have that skill set, they'll have the flexibility in order to tackle whatever those jobs may be that are going to be invented. Technology is changing so rapidly, and it's so challenging to keep up with that, again, there are going to be jobs that come into existence in the next 3 to 5 years. We don't even know what those jobs are yet. But I think most business leaders, most employers say, well, we may not be able to identify the job, but we know the skill set those kids need in order to do those jobs. And they need to be able to work with a group of people. They need to be able to figure things out. They need to show up on time. They need to know how to interact with one another. They need to know how to interact with folks from different cultures and different ethnicities, because our world is shrinking. We live in a very global society right now. I'm sure any business leader on this call would attest to the fact that, they're doing business with folks all over the world. And so to be successful in that environment, you have to have those soft skills. You have to be able to problem solve and critical think and think creatively. And you also have to have a work ethic. We used to talk about work ethic a lot more, when I was growing up. And really my parents' generation took a lot of pride in the fact that, you showed up on time, you worked hard, and you did your job, and you worked the entire time you were there. And, that those skills are still important. We need to make sure our kids leave with a work ethic that is makes them desirable for employers to hire.
I would add to that. I do think the work ethic is really important. I remember my boss used to say, Kristin, you have that Protestant work ethic. He would say, I remember I got pulled in his office one time. He was doing payroll, and he was like, Kristin, you worked 11 hours. When did you take lunch? And I'm like, well, I haven't been taking lunch. And he's like, no, you can't do that. So I loved working. But what I wanted to say was, we talk about the skills they need for a job. I'm kind of going through this with my 11th grader. We're doing the college tour thing and trying to decide, what does she want to go to college for? What does she want to be? And I think sometimes our kids get so stuck on the title of what major do you want to do? And I really think as an adult, I know that so many people go to college for one thing, and then the job they end up working is something completely different. And I really wish, instead of doing college tours, we would really do job tours. I wish we could have kids go into a business and talk to somebody that enjoys what they're doing and find out what they're doing and what skills they need to do that job, which may or may not have anything to do with the college degree that they have or don't have, for that matter, because they don't know the jobs that exist out there, whether they're future or present, because so often our degree has nothing to do with the job that we do. And that's one of the things I found coming to the South, and I don't know if it's from the North. In North, you either worked at Kodak or Xerox or IBM, and it just seemed like the jobs are more pigeonholed. Down here, there's so many entrepreneurs, and there's so many small businesses, and there's just so many different jobs out there that you can't imagine. It's one of those things, you don't know what you don't know. So I just think that students don't know. That's what I like about our job fair that we have booths, and kids can walk around and talk to different people and find out what their job is. And it's not at all, they don't even know these things are out there. So I think it's important for our students to open up their minds to what the major is or what the title is. It may or may not have anything to do with what's in the business world. So just, you have to open up their minds. So I think that's the end result could be very different from the major or the title. And
if I could add to that, James, real quick, I'm really proud of our career tech program that we have in Forsyth County Schools. We have over 10,000 students that participate in career tech student organizations. But I want to give a shout out to our community and any of our business leaders who allow our students to intern with them. We have hundreds of students that intern throughout Forsyth County. And I'm getting to Kristin's point. Those kids get such a great opportunity to really figure out, is this something I want to do? Because that's as valuable as figuring out, I don't want to do this at all. I really do not want to work in this environment. And really nice to figure that out at 16 or 17 than mom or dad paying for 4 years of college and then saying, yeah, this really wasn't for me. And so, we have a lot of kids out in our community doing internships, and I really appreciate our business partners allowing that to happen. And the feedback we get from our business partners that our kids do a really good job, that they do have those soft skills, they do come with that great work ethic. And a lot of them tell us they bring a lot of value to their businesses, that they bring a different perspective and are not afraid to share ideas that they have that might make the business do even better.
Absolutely. Well, and this is anecdotal, but I know it's true, or increasingly true. A neighbor of mine has a small software development company that was a startup and is now growing, and he just hired 3 kids, actually right out of high school, as software programmers. And I said, gosh, that seems so surprising to me. And he said, look, I don't care what piece of paper they have. What I care is what's between their ears, and can they problem solve and get the software developed. and as it turns out, I found out later, all three of those employees are pursuing college. They're just doing it in a very different way than we sort of traditionally think of. And that, I mean, just that by itself, thinking about how employers have moved so far away from the idea of, or some employers at least, of, can you actually do the work? Can you actually, problem solve and accomplish, rather than, what's your pedigree in education? So, well, let's do this. We've got just a few minutes left with y'all, and I do want to make sure that we talk about leadership and your approach to that. So, let's start with, tell me, really maybe the top three, for however you all would like to describe it, most important lessons that you all have learned as leaders, certainly over this past year, but really just in the recent past, and what you're bringing from those lessons moving forward.
Yeah, I'll share with you not only lessons learned, but when I hire a new principal or offer a principal job in Forsyth County, I'll share with you some of the things I say to that new principal. First thing is, you would not be offered this position if you didn't have great people skills. We're a people business, we're a relationship business, and you have got to engage your community. You got to engage with students, with staff, with parents, with business partners. And part of that engagement is you have to be a really good communicator. Oftentimes we hear that word communication, we think about someone who's speaking or writing. But what I emphasize to our leaders is you have to listen. What did Covey say? Seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? It's so important for our leaders to really listen to their stakeholders and understand where they're coming from, especially when you're new to a position. It's just so important not to go in and shoot from the hip. You need to listen to everybody, make sure you really understand the culture of the organization that you are going to be leading, because you have to develop that trust first. People aren't going to follow you unless they trust what you're doing and believe in you. The other thing I would say through this pandemic, and I've always kind of prided myself on this anyway, is leaders have to be clear, concise, consistent. Clear, concise, consistent. And I would hope our principals and cabinet members would say throughout this pandemic that I've communicated with them clearly, concisely, and consistently, so that they had the information they needed in order to be able to be prepared for the unexpected, to be prepared to pivot. So, the communication piece, the relationship piece, you really have to get to know your staff well. And when I say that, especially when I hire a new principal, I tell them, man, know your custodians, know your food service workers, know your bus drivers, because if those folks feel like they're part of the team, you can feel it when you walk into a school. They're wearing the school shirt or the school hat or whatever, and they feel they're on board. When those auxiliary staff, support staff, know that they are contributing to the education of our students, you got a good thing going on right there. And we really do impress upon our leaders as foster relationships with all stakeholders.
I would agree, and especially in communication, and I would expand on that in other ways. I think communication is so important. I think you need to anticipate problems. You had to be thinking about what your external and internal people are going to be concerned about, think about, and be ready for those. I think one of the things that it was a rough year last year, and for example, we knew we were so excited when we got to Labor Day and we didn't have to close the system and didn't have to close the schools yet. And we kept thinking, okay, now let's get to fall break. Then we wanted to get to Thanksgiving, but we knew the day would come, we'd have to close a school, and we thought that we had to close the system, and we didn't. But we had a plan, and as a leadership team, we said, okay, what what criteria are we going to use? What data are we going to look at to make that decision? What's going to be the breaking point when it comes to make that decision? So we agreed in advance before we hit that point, what it was going to be to make that decision. So when we started to get pushback from the community, we were starting here, are you going to close? Are you going to close? We already knew before it got to be too emotional. But emotions were actually part of our decision. We already had factored that into our decision. So we made that choice and that decision before things got too crazy. So we anticipated that. And I think that was great that we all agreed ahead of time, and that communication internally in anticipation of what we were going to be facing was really important. So I know my old AP Chem teacher used to say, knowledge is power. And I don't mean in the way of control, but when you give people information and you pass information, whether it's good or bad, they feel more in control. And I think when we let our parents know where we're at, when we give them data on a daily basis of where our numbers are at, they feel in control and they can see that information. So the more we share, the more they feel in control. And I think that's important as well. I think other things that are important, Dr. Bearden talked about relationships, and then also another thing I've thought of is poking people's buttons. I think this is something Dr. Bearden's really good about. As board members, we really worry about succession planning, we call it. We've had a lot of people retire this year, which, as we do always, people learn with COVID, there's other, life is short. And so every year we always worry about what happens if this department head leaves or that department head leaves, if they retire or they get offered, and we've got good people, we don't want to lose them. So one of the things Dr. Bearden is really good at is knowing our personnel, knowing their strengths. And in doing so, he's really good at looking at when a position opens up, not necessarily just backfilling a position. He will say, this is an opportunity. I might shift a whole department underneath a different person, or I might combine. And he knows how to take people's strengths and combine them, and then allow a new leader to look at the staff and figure out how they might want to rearrange departments. Sometimes that's a cost savings. Sometimes it's adding a new department head or assistant department head. But I think he knows as a leader that he knows the staff, and he knows how to trust those people in those areas to make those decisions and give them time. He doesn't make those changes quickly. He'll let things sit back and let them have the time to do what they need to do. And I think that really helps build, I think it builds camaraderie within a department, but it also really helps build trust within them as well for him, and also as our whole cabinet. So I really like that. I think he's really good about doing that. So kudos to you for Jeff on that one. I think I would say that's about it for what I think is the most important things. And I'd say taking the high road. With the online world today, backspace is your best friend. And when things get rough, just always remember that there's a lot of stuff going on in people's lives, and we all have bad days, including ourselves. And I hope, and I know I have really rough days sometimes, and we all make mistakes, and just remember that it could be you someday. So always have grace, remember to pivot, and just try to be understanding all the time.
And I guess I'd add to that, James, we're working with children, the most precious people in the lives of a parent is their child. And so there are times when parents are going to be passionate because it's their child. And, you just can't take that personally when folks are upset about something. You have to understand, and you have to, again, seek first to understand, right? You have to look at it through the lens that they're looking at it through as a parent, and to be empathetic of that. And I have found, and I know other principals and leaders have found the same thing, even if you do not change a decision, if you disagree with a parent on whatever the situation is, if they leave there feeling that they were heard and truly heard and respected, and they were given a voice, most of the time they'll say, okay, I can live with that. I disagree with you. We're going to have to agree to disagree on this one, but I at least felt like I was heard. And it's so important for us, as Kristin said, we have to listen to our stakeholders. And sometimes, they might be upset about an issue. Don't take it personally, but listen and take it in.
Excellent. Well, and as a different kind of stakeholder representing the Chamber and business community, you all have listened to the business community in ways that systems across the country have not, and there are physical examples of that throughout our system, and certainly our business community. On behalf of a very grateful business community, thank you, because I think it does make a huge difference. I hope in the education experience, but also in the economy, and thank you for that. I just want to close out. Well, first, thank you both for being on today. We're now out of time, and I just thank you both for your time. I know how busy you both are, and appreciate this time that you gave us today. And just want to close by mentioning to everybody who's on that if you'll mark your calendar for August 3rd, and we will be hosting the State of the Schools event at East High School. So that is a very important event. You'll be able to talk a little bit more about kind of the future of the schools, and it is a remarkable celebration and event, and you'll won't want to miss that. So again, thank you all very much. We've recorded this, and it'll be posted a little bit later on, either today or over the weekend, and certainly send it on to folks you think might find it interesting. All right. Thank you both very much. Have a great weekend. And everybody who joined us, thank you. And you all have a great weekend as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.